Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Only Murders in the Building Season 2, Episode 7. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we pick up with Mabel's circumstances after she stabbed the guy in the train last episode. So a lot of my thoughts were wrong. The guy that she stabbed, the guy that's got the glitter all over him, was not in fact Theo, but Theo does kind of find his way into the middle of all this because he actually ended up being on a train with her at the time, and so he went to help her afterwards. Which is, a complicated circumstance, consider it's like, right, he wants to help her, but it's like, yeah, you're still the person that killed Zoe, and you're still the person that didn't say anything for 10 years while Oscar rotted away in prison, which even he's like, that's not who I am. So he wants to try and make things better. It's like he let his dad dictate so much about who he is. Like, the whole grave robbing thing is something he got dragged into because of his dad. His dad wanting to protect him, like, pushed him towards, like, them threatening Tim and letting everything kind of fall on Oscar's shoulders when it comes to the whole Zoe thing. But he wants to try and make things right, especially now that he is away from his dad. Granted, it's like there is no equal communication between them because, well, she doesn't really know ASL and he can't really communicate with her. Which she's like, oh, like the fact that you can only catch like a third of what I'm saying. She's like, movies make it seem like deaf people could like pick up on things pretty much with lip reading. He's like, well, and I love that line of like, well, most deaf people aren't written, like most people, like deaf people don't write movies like that. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. That probably is true. Like, so you probably don't always get the perspective of someone that is deaf. It's probably like, oh, like reading lips and make it seem like everyone's adept at it. It's like that's not a thing. It's probably like, no, like he's probably like catching a third of what people saying this. I mean, who knows, like whether that might be considered average, or maybe that's even above average what most people can. Either way, I just thought that was kind of an interesting line of dialogue. But he explains that after she attacked the guy on the train, she kind of went into a fugue state because she doesn't remember anything. And that's what scares her the most because she knows that she's capable of that. Now the question is, did she actually do it or not? And now, because it's what she's been the most afraid of with this whole Bunny situation. Like, maybe, yeah, I might not have stabbed her with the knife, but maybe I did deal the finishing blow with the knitting needle or something like that. It makes her worried, and maybe she just doesn't remember because this isn't the first time this has happened. Because we had everything with her and her dad, which I was like, okay, we're going to get some flashbacks with Mabel and her dad. I was like, oh, who's going to play her dad? I was like, curious whether it was going to be an actor I recognize or not. Turns out it's totally an actor I recognize. It's Mark Consuelos from who played Hiram on Riverdale. So I was like, oh, cool. I also did not know he was like married to Kelly Ripa. Just like only knew that because I remember like he was on. Was it Kelly and Ryan one time? Or maybe it was even Kelly and... It might have been back when Michael Strahan was her co-host. I don't remember. Either way, I remember like he was on there one time and then I found out that they were married. It's like, oh, I had no idea. Either way, once again, putting all the tangents and all that aside. The way she didn't want to talk about her father, I was wondering if Mabel had a complicated relationship with her father like Charles did with his, but it seems like no, like, well, because her father was all about puzzles and stuff, and then like, oh, later on she's watching an episode of X-Files. He's like, oh yeah, sorry we couldn't go to the zoo, my job has kind of got me working odd hours. And then later on when she saw him and she was pissed because he's like didn't take her trick-or-treating, like his eyebrows were kind of going. I was like, is he sick? Turns out he is, because I was like, that looked like that was probably like potentially like, him losing hair from chemo treatment. Turns out he had stomach cancer, and they made it seem like, oh, he moved out. That's why I was like, I didn't know if like her mom and dad had split. It's like, no, she was young at the time and they didn't know how to really tell her, so they were trying to protect her. So he moved out, and because she was young at the time and he tried to keep it as normal as possible. That's why he couldn't keep his arrangement, because like some days he probably had some days he was probably too weak from the treatments and everything to go anywhere. Plus maybe it's just like some of those times it conflicted with like some of his chemo treatments or something, but that's kind of heartbreaking. to know that, especially, for her, because she snapped at her dad, like, oh, you break your promises all the time, and he never wants to break his promises to her. And so, like I said, I was assuming, like, her dad wasn't going to be a great guy or something, but it seemed like he was a good guy, and she tragically lost him at such a young age. And she goes, it's one thing to just not know what's going on, because your mom and your dad did a lot to make sure that she didn't know. They were trying to protect her from all of this. And I love how that plays a big role in this episode for Mabel, because I like that they did that, not even motif, but that element of when she's in her head, she's got all those puzzle pieces in front of her, and she turns them backward, or turns them upside down, so you can't see the actual picture, because that was the thing between, like, to make some of the puzzles harder, her and her dad to work on. It's like, okay, let's do it without the full picture on the front of the box to let you know what it looks like, and to make it even harder, let's turn it over, and we'll just fit the pieces based on how they fit, not necessarily by the pictures that are on them, adding difficulty to it. And she used that as a coping mechanism, because she didn't really cope. She would basically, the puzzles in her head, she just flipped them over and just kind of buried stuff instead of, like, fully facing it. That was how she compensated with stuff like her dad getting sick, and just anytime something stressful or traumatic happened, that's what she would do. I mean, these wounds don't go away. I mean, it's just been one thing after another, sadly, for Mabel. I mean, she even says, like, she can't walk in front of the building without seeing Zoe's body. She can't even walk past Tim's apartment, because, like, that's a rough thing of just, like... And once again, Charles and Oliver at the time didn't know. They would have done a lot more to protect Mabel if they knew what she was kind of fully dealing with. And Mabel doesn't talk about, like, what she's really going through. So the fact is that they, just kind of, like, they know it's like, right, she's got to be dealing with this, but they probably were hoping, like, she was able to move forward somewhat. But it's like, no, those scars are still there with Zoe and Tim. And, I mean, once again, that's why she was so happy about the Alice situation. It's like, right, I don't have to dive into the past. I get to move forward. You're the one person that isn't obsessed with my past. And it's like, well, that's not 100% the case. Also, it is the interesting irony that at least Mabel says that because Theo and his dad would grave rob people, that ultimately, he has got a ankle monitor. So it's like, oh, you got, some ankle jewelry of your own in the process. Of how ironic that is. I've never actually thought about it until this episode pointed it out that those need to be charged. I was like, I've watched movies and TV shows where ankle monitors come into place. It never once crossed my mind to be like, oh yeah, those would need to be charged, wouldn't they? Because they have, like, they run on, like, I mean, I guess more new age ones. I'm assuming older ones just ran on batteries, that had to be, I mean, but did you have to ever, I guess, like, police would, like, anytime the battery was running low, you'd have to naturally replace them or something. I don't know. It's like, the fact is, he has his own charging for it, so I guess they keep it up, because it's like, right, if it goes dead, because just like, right, if you're outside of where you're supposed to be for too long, they'll come arrest you, and you probably immediately will definitely get thrown back in jail, because you're kind of I think it's like violating your bail to some extent with that whole house arrest, not even house arrest thing, but ankle monitor. So you probably don't want it to go dead, because that'll set off a whole bunch of alarms and stuff. But still, it's just, I never once thought about the fact is, of course, those would need to be charged. I did think it was interesting. Despite just their past connections and stuff, there is such a deeper layer connecting, both Theo and Mabel. I mean, for one, it's like, well, obviously she's buddies with Oliver, but also, like, the fact is that, well, Theo's dad might actually be Will's dad, so there's that whole deeper connection too. But just the fact is that they are both carrying complicated trauma when it comes to their dads, to some extent. I mean, granted, it's very, very different circumstances, but still. And the fact is that Mabel and him kind of bond a little this episode until he gets a ring, a gift out of the machine. And the moment he opened it and it was a green ring, I was like, oh, wasn't that just like... And he flashes back to thinking about Zoe, and both of them kind of hit, it hit both of them at that time. And for him, it's like every night before I go to sleep, I replay it over and over again in my head. He's like, I don't know whether Zoe slipped or if I pushed her. And he's like, I still don't know. And it's just an interesting contrast between, everything, like I said, the trauma he's kind of dealing with, and the fact is Mabel's dealing with her own trauma as well. And they ended up tracking, because the killer, when they stole Mabel's bag, which also had the matchbook with a thumbprint, they ended up dropping their security badge. They work at security at Coney Island, so they ended up going there. And she doesn't see the person's face, but she did manage to get away and get their bag. But sadly, they still had the matchbook. But there was that moment at the end when Mabel ended up finally deciding I've been having the puzzle face down, so now to be able to understand and realize what happened, I need to flip the pieces. I need to flip the puzzle back upside down, every piece of the puzzle. So not just this, she basically, when she flipped it, everything from her dad to the whole thing with Bunny, which now she remembers, no, I didn't stab Bunny. I didn't do it. So that clears her conscience to some extent, being like, okay, because she, despite everything, she wanted to believe she didn't do it, but the fact is she still found herself questioning herself, but now she remembers, I didn't do it. So that at least, I think, helps Mabel start heading in, start moving in the right direction now. And she had actually gave Theo some advice about not running away, not kind of burying stuff or just running away from stuff, because it does you no good. Because she's like, I don't know what your circumstances are, but, everything between him and his dad, but he does eventually, contact his dad back. So where things kind of go on that front, we'll have to wait and see. Because they showed in the preview, I guess the last time we really saw Theo and his dad at least together is that scene where Oliver saw Theo blow up at his dad. I think that's probably the last time they've probably at least been around each other, so he's probably been ducking his dad ever since. On the other side of the episode, we have Detective Williams coming back from maternity leave with baby Keith. So it's okay, it's kind of a nice, bringing that full circle around, because, that was a whole conversation between Detective Williams and her SL. They had decisions about what the baby's name was going to be, so it's interesting. It's okay, the Keith thing is what they ended up settling on, so I thought that was kind of nice. But either way, she's trying to get, obviously, even while I was away, she's I couldn't, because of you idiots, I couldn't focus, because all she could do was focus on this case, because she's there's something else missing, and there's something that you guys aren't telling me. It's well, to be fair, there's a lot they haven't told you, because it's right, how this might all connect to a missing painting, which is about Charles's father, and maybe a missing woman. What was it, Rose Cooper? The moment Charles was yeah, we don't have the knife, you could check here, you could check there, you could check even in Oliver's apartment. And he was I was you still have it in your apartment, don't you? So he's trying to sneak through the passageway in the bathroom, and it's what, you didn't get rid of it? He's yeah, I forgot. I had something really important to do. Help Will with his play. I mean, God, he was it was a travesty, but everything worked out. Oh, my boy. My probably boy, and you're ugh. He's when will these DNA results get back? It's focus, Mabel. And the moment they're saying all this stuff about the murder weapon, I'm you guys are not being quiet. You might be whispering, but the apartment's super quiet, so Detective Williams can hear you. She's literally outside where you're talking about destroying evidence. And she's oh, so you guys had the knife. And they're knife? What are you talking about? She's you guys are perjuring yourself. And he's yeah, I know what perjury means. You guys know what perjury means. And Oliver's I know what perjury means. He's I did a play of 12 Angry Men. Well, it was with women, so it was 12 Angry Women, and everything. He's yeah, I know what perjury means. No, I actually don't know what it means. But ultimately, Detective Williams is trying to help them in the long run, and I did love that whole thing Oliver did to help her. It's with the baby situation, and Oliver from the perspective of a father, and what was it, Charles referenced oh yeah, from an almost but not really father, the whole him and Lucy situation. But it was actually really cute, Oliver doing this thing and just to get baby Keith to let out some gas because a gassy stomach was what was bothering him. And I love when Detective Williams was leaving, she like hit some notes being like, do I fucking know what chorus line is? Of course. And it's like, oh, that's hilarious. But they ended up giving her the knife because they're trusting her that she's not trying to take down Mabel. She's just trying to get to the truth. And it's like, all right, well, it's from Oliver's. It's Oliver's knife, but that's just because someone stole it from me and framed it. And it's like it won't have Mabel's prints on it. At least we don't think. Lucy, my stepdaughter's fingerprints on it, but she's unrelated. And it's like, yeah. So we'll see if any results come up for that knife situation. But ultimately, they end up meeting up with Mabel at the end of the episode. And it was this beautiful reunion. Be like, hey, they're happy to see her and she's happy to see them. So I thought that was beautiful. Obviously, it was in this episode a little bit. But I am curious what the aftermath of the whole, like, oh yeah, Mabel stabbed some guy again. Because even Theo could see it was in self-defense. Because I'm surprised the cops haven't come after her yet. I mean, it still could end up happening. But you would think that, especially because people caught it on video and everything. But I guess, like, maybe the police aren't looking into it too much. Or maybe it hasn't gotten to their attention quite yet. But it just seems like, oh, I'm surprised they're not immediately on her yet. But maybe they couldn't find her. Detective Williams came to find them after the whole incident. But the fact is, to be fair, Mabel wasn't in a place that the police could find her because neither Charles or Oliver knew where she was. So it's not like they could have pointed the police in her direction even if they wanted to. But, obviously they wouldn't want to. They just want to make sure that she's okay. But like I said, just that sweet moment of just them all hugging together at the end there was nice. But in the end, Mabel ends up showing Charles a picture that she got from the killer, and it's a picture of him and Lucy. So, right, the killer's... Because Lucy... I still don't know if Charles and them know that she was hiding in the walls at the time of the murder, so she didn't see the killer's face and everything. I don't know if the killer knows that she was in the wall at the time. Maybe the killer did know and Lucy doesn't realize that the killer knew, but it might just be like the killer's coming after Lucy because of her connection to Charles, or maybe not. Either way, Charles tries to contact her, but then immediately a blackout happens at the worst possible time, which you're like, at first I was like, oh, it's like, did someone mess with the power in the building? But then I was like, why would it have any effect on her cell phone? It's like, nope, it was, I guess, just a unfortunate blackout across the city, which, like, once again, worst timing ever with everything going on. So we'll ultimately have to wait and see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good